Just what do a vacuum cleaner, a pen, a lip balm, a glue stick, and a child's toy gun all have in common? Hello folks, I'm Simon Tilley, and on what today is day 270 of coping with coronavirus, and given what has just recently happened within Debenhams and Arcadia collapsing, I want to talk today in a slightly different tone from my normal DS Honest videos, still about administration though, but how to avoid it, and looking at the power of marketing and beating the competition by establishing your brand as the dominant one. And we're doing that by looking at the 5 biggest mistakes that one brand made and how they lost the marketing war. So you might be wondering what a vacuum cleaner, a pen, a toy gun, a lip balm and a glue stick all have in common. Well, they're all items where a brand of each has become synonymous with the product. Vacuum and hoover, even actually forming its way into being a verb that people state that they're doing the hoovering. Biro and pen, chapstick with lip balm, and Pritt stick with glue stick. And finally, this child's toy gun, known as Megatron. It's a transformer. Now, this brand name has pretty much become the go-to phrase for any robot that can change into something else. And this is the item I'm going to be focusing on today in terms of marketing. As mentioned before, in a departure from my normal DS Honest videos that I've done, and as much as you could argue the Douglas Stafford and My View research debacle itself is an exercise in how not to do PR and marketing, this video is more about a marketing success story. Now, any of my followers or connections on any social media who are watching this, who know me quite well, will know of my love of all things 80s and how I do collect things, most notably things like this, Transformers. So this is quite a fun video for me that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. The Transformers was a toy line launched in the 1980s with a supporting cartoon and comic about a transforming race of warring alien robots from another planet that come to Earth and they can change into everyday vehicles like cars, planes, tanks, etc. For anyone of a similar age, you might recognise these figures here. Cycle and the plane Leader 1. These are the leaders of the respective Gobots, a toy line launched in the 1980s with a supporting cartoon and comic about a transforming race of warring alien robots from another planet who come to Earth and change into everyday vehicles like cars, planes, tanks, etc. Sound familiar? There was a very fierce battle between these two brands in the 1980s, and I'm sure you can work out, by fading into obscurity and for being unknown for anyone under the age of 30, it's clear that these guys, the Gobots, didn't win the war. Whereas by comparison, Megatron and Optimus Prime here, I mean, they're household names, having toy variants of this name available every single year since release. Power Master Optimus Prime in 1988, Generation 2 Tank Megatron in 1993, Beast Wars Optimal Optimus in 1998, Energon Megatron in 2004, Masterpiece Diecast Optimus Prime in 2010, Masterpiece Megatron in 2015, Titans Return Headmaster Optimus Prime in 2017. Gobots were generally viewed as the cheaper imitation of Transformers, in the same way if you as a child asked your parents for Nike Air Max trainers, but instead you ended up with a pair of Knicks trainers, if you got Gobots to play with in the playground instead of Transformers, you were something of a pariah, and at school you lost all your street cred. So the perception of Gobots for many years actually resulted in people thinking they were released on the coattails of Transformers as nothing more than the way to cash in on the popularity of that brand. No, that's not true. What it might surprise you to know is that Gobots are actually the original product, released a whole year earlier in 1983, and it is Transformers that were the plagiarising brand, and yet somehow, despite their head start, Gobots failed. Irrespective of the fact that these are children's toys, this is a fascinating look at how having a head start is not something to guarantee you a permanent brand lead, as well as how joined up marketing and branding can win a short-term campaign war with a rival product. I mean, if we look at Debenhams, It's almost as if, because they were at the height of their popularity in the 50s and 60s, someone said, stop, just don't do anything different, we're where we need to be. Totally wrong, because other brands have come in, overtaken them and Arcadia, as we can now see. So anyway, without further ado, let's delve into looking at the 5 reasons why the Gobots failed. Number 1, joined up branding and marketing. The origins of both the Gobots and the Transformers begin in Japan, where the robot craze of the late 1970s resulted in various toy companies and their products being available for children. Both the toy lines were based on vehicles that changed into robots but were controlled by humans and just had basic names representing the vehicles. Takara and their Diaclone and Car Robots line were what would become the Transformers, whereas Machine Robo, released by Poppy, which was a division of Bandai, was the toy line launched in 1982 that would go on to become the Gobots. Referred to as the 600 series due to the cost of each figure being 600 yen. Quite a cool thing. I think I'm going to name everything I buy exactly the same way. Now, these staple descriptions were not as sexy enough as they needed to be for the US market, so if there was going to be an import there, they needed character names, mythos, and a solid marketing premise to make the line a success. Tonka, you know the guys famous for those big trucks we played with as a kid? Well, they licensed the design from Machine Robo and released them under the Gobots packaging in 1983, with names and descriptions of the Guardians and the Renegades, led by Leader 1 and Cycle. These were an instant success. Their $3 price point also made them affordable, and they flew off the shelves of Christmas 1983. Now, in 1984, Hasbro also saw the potential of this transforming robot craze and decided to partner with Takara to bring Diaclone over to the US. However, they recognised they would need a strong marketing campaign to challenge the established product of the Gobots. They set about writing a backstory of the Autobots and the Decepticons, led by Optimus Prime and Megatron. Now, to put this in context, in the late 1970s, a lot of studies were done on the effect that advertising was having on children and how specific adverts were aimed at them. This was done by the ACT in America. What they reported was that children, especially younger ones, they just can't differentiate between a cartoon and a commercial. Some of your best advertisers, including mainly kids' toys and high-sugar junk food, they knew this all too well. I mean, children have very little understanding of how persuasive commercials are, how easily they buy into the subliminal messages being sent by the advertiser. Just look at some of these with all their bright colours, and children easily buy into it, and advertisers, they know exactly what a lucrative commodity pester powder is. So with that in mind, at the dawn of the 80s, Ronald Reagan deregulated the children's advertising market, and cartoons had a free rein to hawk their products. This is why you will see a lot of toy-related cartoon properties launched in the 1980s. It was actually a 300% increase in cartoons that had licensed characters, and as much as we as adults now, we look back and we love those shows, let's just be realistic. They were nothing more than 22-minute commercials to sell toys and products. This is why when you actually watch all the old cartoons like this...
Oh, She-Ra! And that bothersome He-Man again. Launch Batman! Must gather my force core.
Rather poor shots, eh, Tomax?
Awful, that's what I'd say, Zaymot.
Why is Cobra Commander using stuns? They're fast, but they don't have the armor or the punch of the old...
You may notice there's a lot of exposition. They always refer to each other by their full name, and the vehicles, and the weapons, and the location. Because basically, kids need to know the name of the product they'll be dying to have. This made it a lot easier when searching for it or writing out a wish list for Christmas and birthdays. This is also why the autumn and into the holiday season, unsurprisingly, was when these episodes were launched and were chock full of new vehicles and new characters that were the must-have toys. So with that in mind, Hasbro and their Transformers, they partnered with established giants Marvel. Their comic line needs no introduction. They've got the likes of the Hulk, the X-Men, the Avengers, which are still household successes to this day. What Marvel Comics did was launch their own 4-issue Transformers comics in May 1984 as an advertising platform for the Transformers toys when they're released. And due to the success of this, it became an ongoing comic the following year, which would run for a total of nearly 8 years, ending in 1992. This was also done in tandem with producing an initial 3-episode cartoon pilot, then 13 subsequent episodes by their cartoon arm Marvel Productions, and this was slated for release in September 1984. Now, despite some continuity issues between the storytelling of the two properties, because both were created by sister companies, with a series Bible being written by Bob Budiansky, giving immense details and names and character profiles for 50 or so characters, this meant Transformers had a joined up approach with having an established story for their product and being able to get it out to market despite being a year behind the already established Gobots toy line. Now, by contrast, in early 1984, the only items of written media were 2 Gobots children's books, published by Golden Books. They were titled War of the Gobots and Gobots on Earth. They chronicled the origin of the Gobots, but not a lot else. In the UK, a Robo Machines comic was produced using many of the same characters from the Gobots line, but following a completely different continuity than the cartoon. So, as well as being called a different name, it didn't link up to the cartoon at all. This was written by Tom Tully and ran in the 2nd volume of Eagle comic from November 1984 to July 1985. The comics market is a very busy and fickle market to break into. Sadly, Eagle Comics, with their mix of photo stories, colour, but largely black and white comic strip format, it made it look like a hodgepodge, and it comes across as not really knowing who its target market is, and it was no match for comic giant Marvel. As a kid myself during this time, brightly coloured stories that linked up with the cartoon I was already watching, a very easy way to get me hooked. Black and white stories under a different name, not so much. Gobots also got their own cartoon, coming out roughly neck and neck with Transformers, but it was a whole year after their products had been released, albeit with far more episodes being released in September 1984. By the current standards of the time, this was not a bad attempt, but being made by Hanna-Barbera, it had a younger and more goofy feel to it. So this was the advertising. While the cartoon was the strongest element of the marketing for the Gobots, failing to link it up with an established book or comic, and with the only comic out there having a different story and brand name, it limited its effectiveness to sell the Gobot products. Whereas by comparison, Transformers had both tie-in media singing from the same hymn sheet, with knowledge of one media allowing a child to easily launch into the other, and reading about the same characters, increasing the advertising potential. Number 2, targeted product recognition. In terms of the cartoon featuring products, Gobots had 3 core characters from each side who were the main cast, and they worked on a kind of rotating guest star role of the other toys. So aside from the main 6, other characters didn't really have a chance to be remembered and loved by the core audience of children. Transformers, however, had an ensemble cast with smaller supporting roles like Bumblebee getting regular dedicated screen time, and even to this day becoming synonymous with the brand itself. They also made a small, crucial error on sound. While both shows used stock sound effects, the Gobots had a generic whirring sound when transforming, whereas Transformers uses the now iconic noise. Tiny little things, but they help create mental cues to associate with their brand. Now, in addition to the audio, the biggest flaw, however, was the visuals. The best advertising for your brand is the icon or the logo. Yeah, one of them, it's the Autobot logo. You can see that, it's a red face for the good guys. The other, the purple one, the kind of arched, sinister eyebrow looking one, that's the one for the bad guys, the Decepticons. Now, every character in the show, either being prominent or a supporting role, no matter what, in the comic as well, on, as I've just shown you, on the toys themselves, on the packaging, they all had a prominent badge to help identify what faction they're on, but it also doubled as an advertising logo, something that is still used on the brand to this day. Now, the Gobots, by comparison, They had nothing on them to actually identify which side it was on, beyond if it looked sinister, it was probably on the bad side, but it certainly had no recognisable image or brand logo or anything on it beyond the name on the packaging. Number 3, inferior product design. Now, the next issue is fundamental. It's the product itself. As you'll see, looking at the two figures that I've just been showing you here, they are basic, and to be honest, kind of crappy. I mean, the transformations were simplistic, but given the $3 price point, what you kind of expect. The Transformers, however, as you look at them, being more expensive, they gave more bang for their buck. They also had more playability because they had accessories, weapons, other ones that fitted inside of them. So they had so much more playability. Whereas the Gobots, as you can see in the cartoon, they didn't have weapons. They just fired lasers from their hands, so they had no accessories with the toys. I mean, these were the initial launch errors that gave Transformers the ability to match the Gobots in Christmas of 1984 as the much-have robot, and in later years go even further and overtake them. However, this was not the end though, as Tonka continued to make several subsequent errors of judgment that just accelerated their demise and ultimately sealed their fate. Number 4, misguided litigation. In September 1984, Warner Brothers released a cartoon called The Mighty Orbots. Never heard of them? Nope, I don't imagine you would have done. This was a short-lived cartoon about 6 robots who all combined together to form a super robot called Mighty Orbots. Tonka decided that Mighty Orbots was too close to their tagline of Gobots, Mighty Robots, Mighty Vehicles, and set about trying to sue the giant Warner Brothers. They felt if they could claim infringement, get a potential payout, it would scare off other properties from copying the toy line, as Transformers had done, and maybe gain them some street cred. While they settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, this was a catastrophic error in judgment, in my opinion. Going after a big name like Warner Brothers for a crappy tin pot cartoon that was never a threat to them was completely the wrong focus. And while they had no case against Hasbro, as the Diaclone line in Japan actually predated that of Machine Robo, Hasbro was their biggest threat and where any legal challenge, if at all, should have been focused on. As it happens, Warner Brothers absorbed Hanna-Barbera in 1996, so little bit of irony there for you. Number 5, reactive, not proactive, with poor creative decision. The final nail in the coffin came at the end of 1985. While Gobots had the 65 episodes needed for syndication, this was done all in one go in September 1984 with a single season and no new cartoon in 1985 to advertise the toys. Whereas Transformers had reached 65 episodes with a slow feed across 2 separate seasons, helping create new episodes in a new season in 1985, keeping the line fresh to advertise the newer toys. Transformers the movie had also been in production since late 1984, with the script more or less completed in May 1985 and all the storyboards finished by December 1985. With a big screen blockbuster due out any time in 1986, Tonka had to do something to keep their crappy little Gobots franchise fresh. 1986, a full 5 months prior to the US release of Transformers the movie, Tonka beat them once again and released their own movie of the Gobots. Battle of the Rock Lords, introducing the new characters of the Rock Lords. Robots who changed into, yep, you guessed it, rocks. As a child, part of the fun with playing with the Transformers was the playability, giving you 2 different toys in one, like a car, a jet, or a tank, as well as a robot. By making the alternate mode a rock that just sits there, something I can't really do a lot with, you've just reduced the playability factor by 50%. Not surprisingly, the Rock Lords movie and the toy line totally bombed. Now, realising their folly, as a final effort to get some of the brand name out there, Tonka set about licensing the Gobot name onto just about any product they could. The result was a lot of cheap and crappy merchandise, even worse than the actual toy line, and while some of it did perform the basic art of changing form, any robot mode was made up with stickers to actually generate the faces, adding to the already cheap look and style of the toys. While never been a blockbuster success in terms of other movies, Transformers the movie served its role as the perfect advertising platform of the new 1986 line of toys, many being totally new designs that Hasbro had invested time and money into, once again showing that getting an idea out the door first does not guarantee success, especially if someone comes along later with a better product they've invested more time and money into and gives it a better marketing pitch. Gobots was quietly retired from toy shelves in 1987, with the line barely making its 4th birthday. In 1991, Hasbro acquired Tonka, including all the character names and IP, with a very clear indication of who now owned who. Names like Leader 1 have been repurposed for this little figure, recycled for the 2002 Transformers show Armada as being Megatron's personal slave. A nice little joke into the franchise. The other leader of the franchise, Psykill, he's got a little bit more screen time, showing up in Transformers comics over the last 20 years, but only to be killed off by another Transformer, usually Megatron, as a not-so-subtle nod as to who the ultimate winner of the Transformers versus the Gobots marketing war actually was. And so there you have it, a classic lesson in marketing with the pitfalls to avoid. How does this relate to today and coronavirus, you may ask? Well, there are many new businesses out there and businesses that are booming. People who got out there quickly when lockdown changed how we worked and how we lived. Things like Zoom, face masks, perspex shielding for shop counters all prove there are opportunities for business out there that have an idea that meets a need. However, many businesses and people as sole traders often fail to take the plunge because they can see the marketplace already has a product out there. Now, the moral of the story is twofold. Firstly, if you have a better product than someone already out there and you can market it better, don't be afraid. Just because you're not the first doesn't mean you can't make a success of it. And conversely, if you've already got a product out there that has no competition, do not rest on your laurels. As if there are improvements to be made, there is nothing stopping someone a little bit more savvy coming along with a better product and stealing all your market share. So in conclusion, what is released first is not always best. However, the product that is best in terms of consumer perception will always be picked by that consumer first. Or, put more simply, best first. And if you translate those words into Latin, do you know what that means? Optimus Prime. Well, thanks for watching this video, and I hope it's been an interesting diversion for you. Please be sure to like and subscribe, as it all helps the channel, and be sure to give my other videos a watch, and if you've got any questions, put them in the comments below, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. Till next time.